In the previous simple graph videos, we showed you how to make a graph with multiple planes and multiple axes, which is shown here. So now let's look at making this slightly more complex by allowing the graph to display different instances of similar equipment. So in this case, we're looking at a cooling tower, but the project contains multiple cooling towers. And so if we've set up this graph that shows the performance of a cooling tower, it'd be nice if we could look at all the towers in the same way without having to re-edit the graph every time. The UT2 had that feature as well. It's called a template graph, and the way this is implemented is slightly different in the UT3. So let's take a look at how that works. Down here we have the cooling tower 100 channels, so return temperature, supply temperature, set point, and so on and so forth, that we set up previously. And we have our channels over here with the search term cooling tower 100, CT100 up here. If I make that CT101, I can see a number of other channels in the model that I have, and so all the trends that I have for tower 100, I also have for tower 101. So in order to make this graph show both of those, I'll start by making subfolders to this overall channel folder. I right click on here, say new folder. I'll do that twice actually, so I'll take, for this example, I'll just take those two tower instances and I'll rename this CT100 and I'll rename the second one CT101. There we go. And then up here I'll take the data from the main channel folder and copy it over. I can either move it over or copy it over. For right now, I'll copy it over. So this goes into 101, and then I go back to the main folder and select tower 100 and copy all those over. And by the way, by copying, I can resample the data at different intervals in each folder. Okay, so there we go. So now I have two folders with the same type of data in each, but for different pieces of equipment. Going back to the graph, I'm going to look at the return temperature as a starting point and look what that input actually is at the moment. So again, in the parameters window over here, I can edit individually. Remember, I used this initially to just drag and drop into the graph and it automatically took the name, but I can edit that further. So in here, when I click on this little button, it shows me that the channel is currently defined by a fixed name, which isn't variable. But I can change that definition to be variable. So instead of a static channel, I'm going to select a selection by words, and I can use all words or any words or an exact match, slightly different matching mechanisms, but the same overall principle. I'm going to look for words in the name. Now at the moment it is looking for the return temperature of this tower, so I can use the word or the letters TW_RT and it'll find it, because there's nothing else with regard to this tower that has that combination. You can see that there's also a possible selection of filters. We haven't configured any here yet, and there's a separate training videos on making filters, so for now we'll just leave it unfiltered. Now you can see the search term down here has now changed from a fixed name to a search that equals TW_RT. So while the other channels in this graph are still fixed names, this one has now changed to a search. And what happens is when I click on the graph window and look at where the data comes from, the channel folder at the moment is the overall default root folder, meaning it's called data. That's the root folder that's called channels in here. I can choose a different data folder and watch the blue graph up here, which is the return temperature. When I change the data folder to cooling tower 101 instead of the data that's currently displayed, which is cooling tower 100. As soon as I select that, this graph has now changed. So by selecting a different data source, the search term remains the same, meaning it finds the name TWRT, but it now finds it in this data folder. And that happens to be CT101, TWRT, tower water return temperature. And I can now do the same thing for the rest of the channels that are shown in here. So I'm going to say, show the advanced match any words, search for the name, and I'm going to make this tower water set point. Now incidentally, when you make a mistake in here, let's say I'm looking for the word tower water supply temperature, but I forget to name the property. So I don't tell it whether to search in the name or a different attribute that I can describe custom. And I say, okay, it'll come back and say failed search. So that gives you an indication when it fails to display why. So I'm going to say look for the name, and then I'm going to do the last two as well. Look for speed in here. And by the way, you can see that speed was typed with lowercase letters, so it's not case sensitive. It'll find speed uppercase or lowercase. There we go. Now all the channels are associated with a search rather than a fixed name. And when I change the data folder, so to do that, click in the overall chart window and then look at the channel folder. When I switch to cooling tower 101, the chart shows that tower's performance. When I switch back to 100, it shows that performance. And that's how you make a template graph, and you can step through multiple pieces of equipment without having to regenerate or calibrate a graph. You can also double check whether all the trends have been correctly identified and found, because as I change folders, I'm going to go back to 101 here, you can see the channel names change to 101. If one of them was badly defined or not found, you would see it down here, so you can double check.